Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. The drive to Colorado was supposed to help us heal. My sister Natalie and I had lost our mother to cancer 6 months earlier, and the silence in our hometown had become unbearable. Every corner, every coffee shop, every familiar face reminded us of her absence. Natalie suggested we take 2 weeks off work and just drive. No real destination, just movement. We packed her old Subaru with snacks, playlists from our teenage years, and enough clothes to last us through whatever weather we might encounter. That Tuesday in early October, we found ourselves on a particularly desolate stretch of highway, somewhere in Kansas. The kind where you could drive for an hour without seeing another car. The sun was setting, painting the endless wheat fields in shades of copper and rust, and we both knew we needed to stop soon. The Restway Inn appeared like a mirage after another 40 minutes of nothing but asphalt and dying daylight. It wasn't much to look at. A single-story building with maybe 20 rooms, faded yellow paint peeling off the walls, and a flickering neon sign missing half its letters. But the parking lot had 3 other cars, which meant it was still in business, and the vacancy sign glowed a promising red. Natalie pulled into a spot near the office, and we sat there for a moment, both of us taking in the place. The office window had a handwritten sign that said, "Ring bell for service," next to an ancient-looking doorbell that had been painted over at least 4 times. An old woman appeared after the 3rd ring, moving slowly behind the glass, her gray hair in curlers despite it being past 8 in the evening. She checked us in without many words, just handed us a key attached to a plastic diamond-shaped tag with Room 12 etched into it. The room was at the far end of the building, and as we walked there, dragging our overnight bags, I noticed how quiet everything was. No traffic sounds, no television noise from other rooms, just the crunch of gravel under our feet. Room 12 smelled like old carpet and cherry air freshener trying too hard to mask something else. The beds were twins, separated by a nightstand with a lamp that belonged in someone's grandmother's estate sale. The bedspreads were this aggressive floral pattern in burgundy and green that probably hadn't been changed since the 80s. Natalie claimed the bed near the bathroom, tossing her bag onto it and immediately checking her phone for signal. 2 bars, barely enough. I took the bed by the window, which had thick curtains and a fabric that matched absolutely nothing else in the room. We ordered pizza from the only place that delivered out there, some local joint called Tony's, and spent the evening talking about everything except Mom. Around 11, exhaustion finally caught up with us. Natalie was snoring within minutes of turning off her lamp, that familiar sound that used to annoy me when we shared a room as kids but now felt comforting in this strange place. I woke up around 3 in the morning with that disoriented feeling you get in unfamiliar rooms, where it takes a few seconds to remember where you are. The room was darker than dark, that complete absence of light you only get far from cities. My eyes adjusted slowly, and I could make out the shape of Natalie's bed, the bulk of the dresser against the wall, and then I saw him. At the foot of my bed, sitting on the corner like he was visiting someone in a hospital, was an older man. He wore a plaid shirt, the kind with pearl snap buttons in browns and oranges that I could somehow distinguish despite the darkness. His hair was white and combed back with something that made it shine slightly, maybe pomade or some old-fashioned hair cream. He had deep lines around his eyes, the kind you get from squinting in the sun for decades, and his hands were folded in his lap, patient and still. He was just watching me, not threatening, not moving, just sitting there like he was keeping vigil. My body wouldn't move at first, that sleep paralysis feeling where your brain is awake but your muscles haven't gotten the message yet. I managed to blink hard several times, expecting him to disappear like those shadowy figures you sometimes see when you're half awake. But he remained, solid and real as the bed I was lying in. His breathing was quiet but visible, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. He had a scar on his left hand, a pale line that ran from his thumb to his wrist, and he wore a wedding ring, simple gold band, worn thin from years of never taking it off. The strangest part was how calm he seemed, like he belonged there, like this was his routine. I finally found my voice, or thought I did, but what came out was barely a whisper asking what he wanted. He tilted his head slightly, as if he heard me, but didn't respond, just kept that steady, patient gaze fixed on me. I must have blinked or looked away for just a second because suddenly, he was gone. Not gone like he'd walked away. The door hadn't opened. There were no footsteps, no sound of movement at all. The corner of my bed where he'd been sitting didn't even have an indentation in the mattress. I sat up, my heart hammering against my ribs, and fumbled for the lamp switch. The sudden yellow light filled the room, showing me exactly what I expected. Nothing. Natalie was still snoring, completely undisturbed. I got up and checked the door, still locked from the inside, the chain still in place. The window was sealed shut, painted over so many times it probably hadn't opened in years. I even looked in the bathroom, behind the shower curtain, in the narrow closet. Nobody. I spent the rest of the night sitting up against the headboard with every light in the room on, watching infomercials on the ancient television and jumping at every small sound from outside. When morning finally came, Natalie woke up stretching and yawning, completely oblivious to my night of terror. I told her about the man while she was brushing her teeth, describing every detail I could remember. The plaid shirt with those pearl snap buttons, the white hair slicked back, that scar on his hand. She listened with that half-interested way siblings do when they think you're being dramatic, suggesting maybe I'd had a nightmare or sleep paralysis. But I knew the difference between a dream and what I'd experienced. The way he'd sat there, the weight of his presence, the specific details like the worn wedding ring and the way his collar was slightly askew on the left side. Dreams don't have that kind of mundane specificity. Natalie said we should get breakfast and get back on the road, and I agreed, eager to put distance between myself and room 12. We packed quickly, returned the key to the same elderly woman who barely acknowledged us, and drove about 5 miles down the highway to a small diner called Bev's Kitchen. The diner was one of those timeless places with cracked vinyl booths and a counter with spinning stools that squeaked when you turned. Our waitress, a woman in her 40s with bleached hair and a name tag reading Donna, took our order with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd been doing this for decades. While we waited for our pancakes and eggs, I found myself telling her about our stay at the Restway Inn, partly making conversation and partly hoping for some kind of explanation. When I mentioned the man in my room, describing his plaid shirt and white hair, Donna's hand stopped mid-pour as she was refilling my coffee. She set the pot down carefully and asked me to describe him again. So I did. The pearl snap buttons, the pomaded hair, the scar on his left hand running from thumb to wrist, the thin gold wedding band. Donna's face went pale under her makeup, and she glanced around the mostly empty diner before leaning in closer to our table. "That sounds exactly like Walter Brennan," she said, her voice dropping to just above a whisper. "Used to come in here every Sunday after church with his wife Eleanor. Always ordered the same thing. 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast, black coffee." She pulled out her phone and scrolled through it for a moment before showing us a photo from what looked like a local newspaper's Facebook page. It was a memorial post from 8 years ago, and there he was, the same man I'd seen in my room. Same plaid shirt, same white hair combed back, same weathered face with those deep eye wrinkles. The caption read, "Local rancher Walter Brennan, 73, passes away at Restway Inn." Donna explained that Walter had been driving back from visiting his daughter in Denver when he felt chest pains and pulled into the motel. He'd checked into room 12, told the desk clerk he just needed to rest for a bit, and was found the next morning by housekeeping, sitting upright at the foot of the bed, having died sometime during the night from a massive heart attack. Natalie grabbed the phone from my hands to look closer at the photo, her skepticism evaporating as she compared it to my description. The article had more details. Walter had been a widower for 2 years at that point, still wearing his wedding ring, unable to let go of Eleanor even in death. The scar on his hand, Donna told us, Was from a farming accident in his youth, caught his hand in some machinery and was lucky to keep his thumb. She said people occasionally mentioned strange experiences in room 12, but the motel owner, that elderly woman we'd met, refused to acknowledge anything unusual. Bad for business, Donna supposed. What disturbed me most wasn't that I'd possibly seen someone who died. It was how peaceful he'd seemed, just sitting there watching me sleep like he was watching over someone. Donna refilled our coffee with shaking hands and said Walter had been a kind man, the type who'd help anyone with anything, always checking on neighbors, always making sure everyone was okay. We left the diner in silence, both of us processing what we'd learned. Natalie drove while I searched online for anything about Walter Brennan and the Restway Inn. I found his obituary in the local paper's archives. Everything Donna had said checked out. Father of 3, grandfather of 7, veteran, ran a small cattle ranch for 40 years. The comments section under his obituary was filled with stories of his kindness, driving people to doctor's appointments, fixing fences for elderly neighbors without being asked, sitting with sick folks at the hospital. One comment from someone named Carl mentioned that Walter had lost his youngest daughter to cancer and never quite recovered from it. Said he became even more protective of people after that. The parallel to our own loss wasn't lost on me. Maybe that's why he'd appeared to me specifically. 2 people dealing with grief, meeting in the strangest way possible. Or maybe it was just my tired mind creating patterns where none existed, filling in gaps with a story I'd heard somewhere and forgotten. We never talked about going back to verify anything or investigate further. Some experiences don't need explanation, they just need to be acknowledged and left alone. Natalie and I continued our road trip, staying in better-lit chain hotels for the rest of the journey. But I still think about Walter Brennan sometimes, sitting at the foot of my bed in that run-down motel room, keeping watch in the darkness. I don't know if what I saw was real in any conventional sense. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was grief playing tricks on my mind. Maybe the power of suggestion from staying in a room where someone died. But I know what I experienced, and I know the strange comfort I felt afterward once the fear subsided. Like someone was telling me it was okay to rest, okay to grieve, okay to keep going. The Restway Inn is still in business according to Google, still charging $49 a night, room 12 still available for booking. Sometimes I wonder who else has met Walter and whether he's still there, watching over weary travelers, especially the ones carrying grief-like luggage they can't quite set down. The rain was coming down so hard that night in early November that I could barely see the road ahead, even with my wipers going full speed. My buddy Jason and I were driving through some forgotten stretch of highway in rural Nebraska, coming back from his cousin's wedding in Iowa. We'd planned to push through the whole drive in one shot, but the weather had other ideas. Around midnight, we finally admitted defeat when we saw the neon sign for the Clearwater Lodge flickering through the downpour. It was one of those old-fashioned motels where you park right in front of your room door, the kind with wood paneling that probably hadn't been updated since the 70s. The woman at the front desk had thick glasses and hair dyed an unnatural shade of burgundy, and she barely looked up from her crossword puzzle when she handed us the key to room 7. The room smelled like old carpet and that pine-scented cleaner they used to cover up cigarette smoke, even though there was a faded no smoking sign on the door. 2 twin beds with matching green bedspreads, a small TV bolted to the dresser, and between the beds this ancient-looking armchair covered in some kind of brown velour fabric that had seen better days. Jason crashed almost immediately after we got in, not even bothering to change out of his clothes. I stayed up for maybe another hour, scrolling through my phone and listening to the rain hammering against the window. The storm was getting worse, and every few minutes lightning would light up the whole room through the thin curtains. Eventually, exhaustion won, and I drifted off to the sound of Jason's snoring mixing with the storm outside. I don't know what woke me up. The digital clock on the nightstand showed 3:17 a.m. in those harsh red numbers. The storm had calmed down to a steady drizzle, and Jason had stopped snoring. My eyes were still adjusting to the darkness when I noticed it. Someone was sitting in that brown velour chair between our beds, not slouching or relaxed like someone who just sat down, but sitting perfectly straight, hands folded in their lap, facing forward toward the TV. At first, my brain tried to make sense of it. Maybe Jason had gotten up to sit there? But no, I could see Jason's shape in the other bed, the blanket rising and falling with his breathing. This person, this figure, was wearing what looked like a light-colored button-up shirt, maybe pale blue or gray, hard to tell in the dark. Their hair was short, neatly combed to the side, and they weren't moving at all, not even the small movements people make when they breathe. I laid there completely still, trying to control my own breathing, watching this person through barely open eyes. They never turned their head, never shifted their weight, just sat there like they were waiting for something. The weird thing was how normal they looked, not threatening or scary in appearance, just a regular person, maybe in their 40s, average build, the kind of person you'd pass in a grocery store and never think twice about. But the way they sat there, so still, so silent, in our locked motel room at 3 in the morning, that's what made every muscle in my body tense up. I wanted to say something, to yell, to wake Jason, but I couldn't make myself move or speak. I just kept watching, and they just kept sitting, and the minutes crawled by like hours. Then something changed. The person's head started to turn, slow and deliberate, like they were on a swivel. Not toward me, but toward Jason's bed. They stared at him for what must have been a full minute, then their head turned back to face forward. A few seconds later, they did it again, this time looking at me. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to keep my breathing steady and deep like I was still asleep. I could feel them watching me, could sense their gaze even through my closed eyelids. When I finally risked opening my eyes just a crack, they were facing forward again. The person's hands were still folded in their lap, but now I noticed their fingers were moving slightly, tapping against each other in some kind of rhythm or pattern I couldn't make out. The movement was so subtle I hadn't noticed it before, but once I saw it, I couldn't stop watching those fingers drumming silently against each other. That's when Jason stirred in his sleep, mumbling something I couldn't understand and rolling over to face the wall. The person in the chair immediately stopped the finger movements and turned their head toward Jason again, watching him intently. After Jason settled back into sleep, the figure stood up. The movement was smooth, almost mechanical, like they were being pulled up by invisible strings. They were taller than I'd expected, maybe 6 feet or so, and their clothes were wrinkled like they'd been worn for days. They took 3 steps toward Jason's bed and just stood there looking down at him. From my angle, I could see their profile now. A straight nose, thin lips, clean-shaven face. Nothing remarkable except for how absolutely still they stood, like a department store mannequin. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure they'd hear it, but they never looked my way. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 30 seconds, the person walked around Jason's bed to the window. They pulled the curtain aside just slightly with 2 fingers and peered out into the parking lot. The dim light from outside caught their face for the first time, and I could see they had pale skin, almost grayish in that weak motel sign glow. They let the curtain fall back and moved to the dresser where the TV sat. Their fingers traced along the edge of the dresser, then stopped at Jason's wallet that he'd tossed there earlier. They didn't pick it up, didn't open it, just placed their palm flat on top of it for several seconds. Then they moved to my side of the room, and I had to force myself not to react as they got closer. They stopped at the small table next to my bed where I'd left my car keys and phone. Again, that same strange behavior, just touching them lightly, like they were memorizing the texture or temperature. The person then did something that still makes no sense to me. They went back to the chair and sat down exactly as before. Same posture, same position, hands folded the same way. But this time they started speaking, so quietly I could barely make out the words. It wasn't to us, or at least it didn't seem like it. They were reciting something, numbers maybe, or addresses, I couldn't quite tell. The voice was monotone, Neither male nor female, really, just this flat, continuous murmur. 417 Elm, 2311, North Side, blue trim, 7 minutes past. Random fragments that meant nothing to me, but they kept repeating certain phrases. Jason suddenly coughed in his sleep and the talking stopped instantly. The figure's head snapped toward him so fast it made me flinch. They watched Jason for another long moment, then slowly turned back to face forward. But the talking didn't resume. I must have been watching this person for another 20 minutes, fighting to stay awake despite the adrenaline, when suddenly Jason sat bolt upright in his bed. "What the hell?" he said, loud enough to make me jump. He was staring directly at the chair, at the person sitting there. "Who is that? Did you let someone in?" His voice was confused but alert, not the grogginess you'd expect from someone just waking up. The person in the chair didn't react to Jason's outburst at all, didn't even turn their head. They just sat there still as a statue. Jason reached over and flicked on the lamp on his nightstand, and in that harsh yellow light, we both got our first clear look at the intruder. It was a man, definitely, probably mid-40s like I'd guessed, wearing a pale blue dress shirt and dark slacks. His shoes were covered in mud, leaving small clumps on the carpet beneath the chair. His face was completely expressionless, eyes focused on nothing like he was in some kind of trance. "Hey!" Jason said, louder this time, getting out of bed. "I'm talking to you!" He took a step toward the chair, and that's when I finally found my voice. "Don't," I said, and Jason turned to look at me, surprised I was awake. "How long has he been there?" Jason asked, not taking his eyes off the man now. "Since 3:17, I whispered. "Maybe longer." Jason grabbed his phone, the screen lighting up his face. "I'm calling the front desk." But as he started dialing, the man stood up again with that same smooth, unnatural movement. We both tensed, ready for something to happen, but he just walked to the door, our locked door, and stood facing it, his hand resting on the doorknob. He didn't try to turn it, didn't pull on it, just stood there with his hand wrapped around the knob, his back to us. Jason held the phone to his ear, but after a few rings he lowered it. "No one's answering," he said, his voice tight with frustration. We both stood there, not sure what to do. The man at the door hadn't moved an inch. Finally, Jason said, "We need to get out of here," and started gathering his things. That's when the man spoke, clear as day, still facing the door. "Room 7, 2 guests, silver sedan, Illinois plates." He was describing us, our room, my car. Then he continued, "Check-in 11:43 p.m., front desk, burgundy hair, crossword puzzle, room 7. The way he said it was like he was recording information, filing it away somewhere. Jason and I looked at each other, and I could see my own fear reflected in his eyes. The man's hand finally released the doorknob, and he turned around to face us. His eyes were the strangest part. They were looking at us but not seeing us, if that makes any sense. Like he was looking through us at something else entirely. Without warning, the man walked past us, close enough that I could smell him. A mix of damp earth and something chemical, like fertilizer or cleaning products. He sat back down in the chair and closed his eyes. Jason and I didn't need to discuss it. We grabbed our bags, still packed from the night before, and headed for the door. Jason unlocked it and yanked it open, and we practically ran to my car. As I started the engine, we both looked back at the room. Through the window, we could see the man still sitting in the chair, silhouetted by the lamplight. We drove straight through until dawn, stopping only once for gas 2 hours away. At the gas station, Jason finally said what we were both thinking. That guy had a key, didn't he? How else could he have gotten in? And he was right. Our door had been locked, the chain still on when we'd left. There was no way he could have entered without a key. The next day, back home in Chicago, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Jason came over to my apartment, and we spent hours going over every detail. That's when he pulled out his phone and showed me something that made everything worse. While I'd been packing in a panic, he'd managed to take a photo of the man sitting in the chair. The image was blurry but clear enough to see his face. We decided to do some investigating, starting with calling the Clearwater Lodge. When we asked about our stay in room 7, The woman who answered, different from the night clerk, went quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that chilled me. "We don't rent out room 7 anymore. Haven't for 3 months. When we insisted we'd stayed there just 2 nights ago, she got flustered and said she'd have to check with the manager. She never called us back. We tried calling again several times over the next week, but they either hung up or said the manager wasn't available." About a month later, Jason found a news article online from a Nebraska newspaper. 3 months before our stay, a man named Douglas Garrett had been found dead in room 7 of the Clearwater Lodge. He'd been a private investigator from Omaha, working a case involving interstate theft rings that targeted travelers. The article included a photo, and even though it was grainy, we both recognized him immediately. It was the same man from Jason's phone photo. The article said he'd been found sitting in a chair, dead from carbon monoxide poisoning from a faulty heater. The really disturbing part? The police found notebooks full of detailed observations about motel guests, their cars, their routines. He'd been surveilling criminals but also recording information about regular travelers. They never figured out who he was working for or why he was specifically watching that motel. We never went back to verify anything, never called the police. What would we even say? But sometimes I wonder if Douglas Garrett is still sitting in that chair in room 7, still collecting information, still watching, and I wonder who's reading his reports. The fight started somewhere around mile marker 237 on Interstate 80, right after we passed that abandoned gas station with the faded Sunoco sign hanging by one chain. My girlfriend Ashley and I had been driving for 14 hours straight from California to visit her parents in Ohio, and exhaustion was making us both say things we didn't mean. She wanted to push through the night and get there by morning, but I could barely keep my eyes open anymore. The windshield wipers were fighting a losing battle against the February sleet, and when I saw the neon vacancy sign for the Starlight Motor Lodge flickering through the storm, I pulled off without asking. Ashley slammed the car door hard enough to make the whole Corolla shake, and we checked in separately at the front desk, barely looking at each other. The old woman behind the counter, wearing a sweater with embroidered cats despite it being past midnight, handed us a single key attached to a plastic diamond with Room 8 etched into it. Our room smelled like old cigarettes masked with pine air freshener, and the carpet had these weird brown stains near the bathroom door that I tried not to think about. Ashley took the bed closest to the window without saying a word, and I collapsed on the other one, still wearing my jeans and sneakers. The mattress felt like it had been broken in by 1,000 different bodies over decades, sagging in the middle with springs that creaked every time I breathed. Around 2 a.m., just as I was finally drifting off, we heard it. A man's voice from the room next door, room 9, shouting something I couldn't quite make out through the wood paneling. Then came a woman's voice, high-pitched and desperate, followed by what sounded like furniture being shoved across the floor. Ashley sat up in her bed, and for the first time in hours, we actually looked at each other, both of us thinking the same thing. Should we call someone? The arguing got worse over the next hour, and I mean really bad. The man's voice turned guttural, like he was choking on his own rage, and we could hear thuds against our shared wall that made the generic landscape painting above my bed rattle in its frame. The woman was sobbing now, these long, drawn-out wails that seemed to go on forever before cutting off abruptly. Then there'd be silence for maybe 30 seconds, just long enough for us to think it was over, before it would start up again. Him screaming about money, about lies, about someone named Bridget who apparently ruined everything. Ashley grabbed her phone and started recording the sounds, whispering to me that we might need evidence if something really bad happened. At one point, we heard what sounded exactly like a body hitting the floor, followed by dragging sounds across their carpet. I pressed my ear against the wall and could make out the woman pleading, saying please over and over, her voice muffled like something was covering her mouth. I finally had enough when we heard glass breaking. Not just a cup or something small, but what sounded like the mirror or maybe the window. I threw on my jacket and told Ashley I was going to the front desk to report it, but she grabbed my arm and said we should call 911 instead. While we were arguing about it in whispers, afraid they might hear us and turn their anger our way, the sounds suddenly stopped completely. Not gradually, not like they were calming down, but all at once like someone had hit a mute button. We sat there in the sudden silence for maybe 5 minutes, both of us breathing shallow, waiting for something else to happen. Ashley pointed at the digital clock on the nightstand, 3:47 a.m., and mouthed that maybe they had finally worn themselves out. But then, just as I was convincing myself to try to sleep again, we heard 3 slow, deliberate knocks on our door. Not pounding or frantic, but measured, like someone counting between each one. Neither of us moved. Ashley had her phone ready to dial 911, her thumb hovering over the call button, and I was gripping the lamp from the nightstand like a baseball bat. The knocks came again, same rhythm, same force, and this time followed by a woman's voice, but not the crying woman from next door. This voice was calm, almost cheerful, asking if everything was all right in there, if we needed anything. It sounded like the old lady from the front desk, but wrong somehow, like she was standing too close to the door or speaking through water. Ashley whispered that the desk clerk wouldn't make rounds at 4 a.m. and I had to agree. We stayed frozen like that for probably 10 minutes, barely breathing, until we heard footsteps moving away down the concrete walkway. They had this weird shuffling quality, and I counted at least 14 steps before they faded out completely, which seemed like too many to just reach the next room. The rest of the night was pure hell, even though room 9 stayed quiet. Every little sound made us jump. The ice machine down the hall cycling on, a truck passing on the interstate, the heater kicking in with a metallic groan. Around 5:30 a.m., we heard movement from room 9 again, but different this time. Drawers opening and closing, the bathroom faucet running, the squeak of bed springs like someone sitting down and standing up repeatedly. Normal morning sounds, except there was something mechanical about the pattern, the same sequence repeating every few minutes like a loop. Ashley had been recording everything on her phone, and when she played back one section, we realized the sounds were identical each time. Not just similar, but exactly the same down to a little cough at the end. By the time pale sunlight started leaking through the blinds, we had packed our stuff and were ready to get the hell out of there. At 7 a.m. sharp, we walked to the front office together, dragging our bags and probably looking like we'd been up all night, which we had. A different woman was behind the desk now, younger, maybe 40, wearing a name tag that said Janet in faded letters. I set the room key on the counter and tried to keep my voice steady as I told her about the violent fight in room 9, how we'd been worried someone might be hurt. Janet's face scrunched up in confusion, and she turned to check the guest registry, running her finger down a handwritten list in a spiral notebook. She looked up at us with this expression of genuine bewilderment and said room 9 had been vacant for 3 days. Ashley immediately pulled out her phone to show the recordings, but Janet held up her hand and said she believed we heard something, but it couldn't have been from that room. She even offered to show us, walking us back down the row of rooms with a massive ring of keys jangling from her belt. When Janet unlocked room 9, the smell hit us first, mothballs and something else, like wet newspaper left to rot. The room was clearly unused, with the beds made so tight you could bounce a quarter off them. No luggage, no personal items, nothing. But what made my chest tighten was the bathroom mirror, completely shattered in a spiderweb pattern with several pieces missing, and beneath it on the counter, dried blood in a pattern that looked like someone had gripped the edge of the sink with bloody hands. Janet gasped and immediately started apologizing, saying maintenance should have caught this, that sometimes drifters break in through the bathroom windows. But Ashley was pointing at something else. The carpet near the wall we shared had these deep indentations, 4 of them in a row, like furniture legs had been pressing down for years. Except the room only had 2 beds, both against the opposite wall and no other furniture that would make those marks. Janet started making phone calls right there in the room, first to someone she called Roy, apparently the maintenance guy, then to someone else who seemed to be the owner. While she was distracted, I walked over to the wall we'd heard everything through and put my hand flat against it. The paneling was cold, way colder than it should have been with the heater running all night, and when I knocked on it, the sound was all wrong. Not hollow like you'd expect from thin motel walls, but solid, like there was something dense packed behind it. Ashley was examining the broken mirror more closely and noticed something I'd missed. Some of the missing pieces were on the floor, but others seemed to have been pushed through to whatever was behind the mirror, leaving these small holes you could almost see through into darkness. She tried shining her phone flashlight through one of them, but the light just seemed to get swallowed up. That's when Janet got off the phone and told us something that made everything worse. She said Roy remembered this room now. There had been an incident in early January, about 6 weeks ago. A couple had stayed here and gotten into a domestic dispute. The man, whose name she didn't know, had been arrested after the woman called 911, but she'd refused to press charges and they'd both checked out the next morning. The thing was, the room had been cleaned and inspected since then, multiple times, and the mirror had definitely been replaced. She showed us a maintenance log to prove it, with Roy's signature dated just 5 days ago, confirming the room was in perfect condition. But here's what really got to me. When Ashley asked to see the guest registry again, to look at January's entries, Janet flipped back through the notebook and found that several pages had been torn out. Roughly the first 2 weeks of January were just gone, leaving only these little paper fragments stuck in the spiral binding. We left without even asking for a refund, just got in the car and drove in silence for about 20 miles, before Ashley finally played back the recordings from her phone. The arguing voices were there, clear as day, but when she got to the part where we'd heard the morning sounds, that repetitive loop of drawers and faucets, there was just static. Not regular static either, but this rhythmic pulsing sound like a heartbeat through an ultrasound machine. We pulled over at a rest stop, and I called the motel from a payphone, pretending to be a customer asking about room 9's availability. The young guy who answered said that room didn't exist, that their rooms only went up to 8, and when I insisted I'd stayed next to room 9 just that morning, he got quiet for a long moment before saying I must be confused, maybe thinking of a different motel. Ashley grabbed the phone from me and demanded to speak to Janet, but the guy said nobody named Janet worked there, never had. We drove the rest of the way to her parents' house without talking about it, but that night Ashley couldn't sleep and started researching the motel online. She found 3 different reviews from the past 2 years, mentioning sounds from room 9, always the same story: violent arguments, crying, furniture moving, and always with the same response from management that room 9 didn't exist. One review included a photo of the motel from the parking lot, and when we zoomed in, we could count the doors, 8 rooms, just like the kid on the phone had said. But in our photo, the one Ashley had taken that morning to show her parents what a dump we'd stayed in, there were clearly 9 doors. We still have that photo, and we still have the recordings. And sometimes I wake up at 3:47 a.m. for no reason at all, my heart pounding, absolutely certain I can hear that measured knocking again, even though we live in a house now with no shared walls, no room 9, no explanation that makes any kind of sense. Last summer changed everything about how I travel. I was 32, working as a medical equipment sales rep, which meant spending at least 3 nights a week in different motels across the Midwest. The job paid well, and honestly, I'd gotten used to the routine. Check in, grab dinner at whatever chain restaurant was nearby, catch up on emails, sleep, and drive to the next appointment. That Wednesday in late July started exactly like hundreds of other nights on the road, except this time I'd stopped at a place called the Riverside Lodge, about 40 miles outside of Milwaukee. The neon sign out front had 2 letters burned out, and the parking lot had more potholes than asphalt. But after 8 hours of driving through construction zones, I just wanted a shower and a bed. The guy at the front desk barely looked up when I walked in. His name tag said Kevin, and he had this weird habit of scratching at a patch of psoriasis on his elbow, while he typed with one hand. The lobby smelled like old carpet and whatever pine-scented cleaner they'd used to try to mask it. He handed me the key to room 14, an actual metal key, not a card, and mumbled something about the ice machine being broken. The room was at the far end of the building, past a flickering hallway light that made everything look like those old horror movies my brother used to make me watch. When I opened the door, that familiar musty motel smell hit me, mixed with something else I couldn't place, like burnt plastic or melted rubber. The AC unit under the window was already running full blast, making this grinding noise every few seconds, but at least it was cold. I dropped my suitcase on the luggage rack and did my usual room check, pulled back the comforter to check for bed bugs, tested the locks on the windows, made sure the bathroom door actually closed all the way. Everything seemed normal enough for a cheap motel. The TV remote was wrapped in plastic. The coffee maker had a layer of dust on it, and there was a cigarette burn on the nightstand even though this was supposedly a non-smoking room. While I was setting up my laptop on the little desk, I noticed this tiny red light up in the corner, where the wall met the ceiling. Just a small dot, barely visible unless you were looking right at it. I figured it was a smoke detector, or maybe some kind of security sensor. Most of these older places had been retrofitting their rooms with new safety equipment to meet insurance requirements. I actually remember thinking it was good they were finally updating their systems, especially in a place that looked like it hadn't been renovated since the 80s. Around 9:30, after I'd showered and changed into my pajamas, I called my sister Beth to check in. She was going through a rough divorce and liked hearing about my adventures on the road. It distracted her from her own problems. While we were talking, I walked around the room, stretching my legs after the long drive. That's when I noticed the red light again, except this time something bothered me about it. The angle was wrong for a smoke detector. Those are usually mounted flat against the ceiling, but this thing seemed to be pointing down into the room. I stood on the bed to get a closer look, and that's when I saw it wasn't mounted on any kind of standard bracket. It was just this small black cube, maybe the size of a dice, stuck to the wall with what looked like putty or mounting tape. My chest got tight and I told Beth I'd call her back. The next few minutes were a blur of panic and disbelief. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, shining it directly at the device. Through the phone's light, I could see a tiny lens in the center of that red dot. My whole body went numb. I'd been in this room for over 2 hours. I'd changed clothes, walked around in just a towel after my shower, had been sitting on the bed in my underwear while working on my laptop. I climbed down and immediately started searching the rest of the room, running my fingers along every surface, checking behind every picture frame, examining the air vents. There was another one behind the mirror in the bathroom, tucked into the frame where the glass met the wood. This one didn't have a light, just a tiny hole that you'd never notice unless you were specifically looking for it. The mirror was positioned perfectly to see into the shower. I threw on my jeans and t-shirt, not even caring that my hair was still wet, and ran down to the front desk. Kevin was still there, now watching something on his phone with the volume turned up too loud. Sounded like some kind of gaming stream. When I slammed my hands on the counter and told him about the cameras, his whole demeanor changed. He stopped scratching his elbow and looked at me with this expression I'll never forget. Not surprise, not concern, just mild annoyance, like I'd interrupted something important. He said the owners had installed security cameras in some rooms after a bunch of break-ins last year, claimed it was all legal, and there should have been a notice in the rental agreement. When I demanded to see this supposed agreement, he pulled out a crumpled piece of paper from under the desk and pointed to a line in tiny print at the bottom about security monitoring for guest safety. His finger left a greasy mark on the paper. I snatched the paper and read it 3 times, but the wording was so vague it could mean anything. When I asked him who had access to the footage, he shrugged and said it went to a security company the owners contracted with, someplace called SecureView Solutions. He claimed he didn't know anything else about it, but the way he kept glancing at his phone made my skin prickle. I demanded a different room, one without cameras, and he actually laughed. This short, wet sound like he was clearing his throat. He said all the rooms had them now, for insurance purposes, but if I wanted to leave, he could process a refund minus the cleaning fee. A cleaning fee for a room I'd been in for 2 hours. While we were arguing, another guest came in, a middle-aged guy in a wrinkled suit who walked straight past us to his room without making eye contact. Kevin watched him go, then turned back to me with this blank expression and asked if I wanted the refund or not. I went back to room 14 to pack my things, moving as fast as I could, while keeping my body turned away from the corners where I knew the cameras were. The whole time I was throwing stuff into my suitcase, I kept thinking about who might be watching. Were they watching right now? Had they been watching when I called my sister and mentioned her divorce, her kids' names, where she lived? My hands wouldn't stop trembling as I zipped up my bag. Before I left, I took photos of both cameras with my phone, making sure to capture their exact positions and the sketchy wiring running from them into the walls. As I was leaving, I noticed something I'd missed before. There were tiny holes drilled in the walls near the electrical outlets, and thin black cables running along the baseboards, painted over but still visible if you knew what to look for. This wasn't some recent security upgrade. This had been planned, built into the bones of the room. I drove to a well-lit truck stop about 15 miles away and sat in my car for an hour, trying to figure out what to do. My first call was to the police. The dispatcher connected me to an officer who took my report over the phone, but he sounded exhausted and kept asking me to repeat details like he wasn't really writing them down. He said they'd send someone to investigate in the morning, but without proof that the cameras were recording without consent or being used for illegal purposes, there wasn't much they could do immediately. Hidden cameras in private property were a gray area, he said, especially if there was any kind of written notice, no matter how vague. After I hung up, I sat there in the harsh fluorescent light of the truck stop, watching families and truckers come and go, feeling like everyone could somehow see through my clothes, like the violation had followed me out of that room. The worst part came 3 days later. I'd filed reports with the police, the Better Business Bureau, even tried to leave reviews online, but most platforms removed them for lacking verification. Then I got a text from an unknown number. No words, just a link. Against every instinct, I clicked it. The page that loaded made me vomit right there in my kitchen. It was a streaming site, and there I was, a thumbnail image of me in that motel room standing in my underwear, looking at my laptop. The video title had my first name and the city I lived in. The view count was over 3,000. I called the police again, and this time they took it seriously. But the site was hosted overseas, the IP addresses were masked, and the trail went cold fast. The detective assigned to my case, a woman named Gomez who'd seen too much of this stuff, told me these operations pop up and disappear constantly, selling footage to subscription sites that redistribute it across the dark web. I spent the next 2 months in a paranoid haze. I hired a lawyer who sent cease and desist letters that went nowhere. I paid a company $800 to scrub my information from the internet, but new videos kept appearing with different watermarks, different titles, always with just enough personal information to make me searchable. My sales numbers dropped because I couldn't bring myself to stay in motels anymore. I'd drive 4 hours back home instead of staying overnight, or sleep in my car at rest stops. Every red light made me nauseous. Every small black object in every room became suspicious. I bought a device online that detects camera lenses, this little gadget that reflects light to spot hidden equipment, and I'd spend 30 minutes sweeping every room I entered. Bathrooms at restaurants, changing rooms at stores, even my own apartment, because I couldn't shake the feeling that if it happened once, it could happen again. My therapist said I was developing symptoms of PTSD, but knowing that didn't make the hypervigilance go away. The Riverside Lodge is still operating. I check sometimes late at night when I can't sleep, reading their new reviews on travel sites. Most are one-star complaints about dirty rooms and rude staff, but every few weeks there's one that makes me sick, usually from women, mentioning weird feelings about the place, strange sounds at night, or how the owners seem to be watching them too closely. I report every review I find to the platforms, to the police, to anyone who will listen. But Kevin isn't there anymore. The ownership supposedly changed hands, and there's no proof the new owners have any connection to what happened. Detective Gomez called me last month to say they'd found similar operations in 12 other motels across 3 states, all with different owners on paper but the same setup. Old buildings, cheap rates, rooms at the end of hallways, and those tiny black cubes tucked into corners. They shut down 5 of them, but the rest disappeared before warrants could be served, probably just to resurface somewhere else with different names, different facades, same hidden cameras broadcasting to anonymous servers halfway around the world. The divorce papers were finally signed in March 2018, and I needed to get from Oregon to Florida where my sister lived. I'd sold everything that wouldn't fit in my beat-up Ford Explorer, packed what was left of my life into boxes, and hit the road with nothing but podcasts and gas station coffee to keep me company. After 16 hours of driving through endless stretches of highway, my eyes were burning and my back was screaming. It was around 9 p.m. when I saw the flickering neon sign for the Desert Palm Lodge, just off Interstate 40 in Arizona. The place looked exactly like what you'd expect for $49 a night. Peeling paint, a half-dead palm tree by the office, and one of those old-school signs where half the letters didn't light up anymore. But at that point, I would have slept in my car if I had to, so I pulled into the gravel parking lot and headed to the office. The manager was this tall, skinny guy named Frank, who had these really pale gray eyes that never seemed to blink enough. He typed my information into an ancient computer that made clicking sounds like it was about to die, then reached behind him and grabbed a key attached to one of those big plastic diamond-shaped tags. "Room 23, he said, sliding it across the counter. But then he stopped, his hand still on the key, and stared at me for what felt like forever. His fingers started tapping on the counter, not in a nervous way, but deliberate, like he was counting something in his head. Then suddenly he yanked the key back and turned around to the wall of keys behind him. "Actually, no. Let me give you room 31 instead. Better water pressure." He grabbed a different key and practically shoved it at me, already turning back to his computer before I could even respond. The way he said it wasn't like a suggestion. It was like he was telling me I had no choice in the matter. Room 31 was at the far end of the building, past the ice machine that hummed like it was fighting for its life, and a vending machine full of snacks that probably expired years ago. When I walked past room 23 on my way there, I noticed something weird. The door was slightly newer than all the others, like it had been replaced recently. The paint was a different shade of beige, just different enough that you'd notice if you were paying attention. There was also this chemical smell coming from that direction, like industrial bleach mixed with something else I couldn't place. Room 31 itself was standard motel shabby. Cigarette burns on the nightstand even though it was supposedly non-smoking, a TV from the 90s, and curtains that didn't quite close all the way. I threw my overnight bag on the bed and went to grab the rest of my stuff from the car. But when I walked past the office, Frank was standing outside smoking, watching me. Not trying to hide it either, just standing there under the yellow bug light, following my every move. I decided to grab dinner at the diner across the street, this 24-hour place called Rusty's that had seen better days, but at least had decent reviews online. The waitress, Gloria, had been working there for 23 years according to her name tag, and she had that friendly but tired look of someone who'd heard every story that passed through. When I mentioned I was staying at the Desert Palm, she gave me this look. Not quite pity, not quite concern, but something in between. "Frank put you in a good room?" she asked while pouring my coffee. I told her room 31, and she nodded slowly, refilling my cup even though I'd barely taken a sip. "That's good. You staying just the one night?" When I confirmed I was leaving first thing in the morning, she patted my hand and said, "Smart girl," before walking away to take another order. The way she said it made my chest feel tight, like there was something everyone knew except me. When I got back to the motel around 10:30, the parking lot was mostly empty except for my Explorer, an old Chevy pickup, and a white sedan with rental plates. Frank wasn't at the desk anymore, There was a younger guy there now, maybe early 20s, scrolling through his phone with earbuds in. I walked past room 23 again, and this time I noticed something else. The window had boards behind the curtains. You could only see them because the curtain had gotten caught on something and pulled aside just enough to show the edge of a 2x4. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds, trying to understand why a motel room would be boarded up from the inside, but still have a normal-looking door. That chemical smell was stronger now too, and there was something else, this faint buzzing sound, like fluorescent lights that were about to burn out. I hurried to my room and double-locked the door, putting the chain on for good measure. I couldn't sleep. Every time a car passed on the highway, the headlights would sweep across my ceiling through the gap in the curtains, and I kept thinking about that boarded-up window. Around 2 a.m. I heard footsteps outside my door, slow, deliberate, like someone was trying not to make noise. They stopped right outside, and I could see the shadow of feet in the gap under the door. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure whoever it was could hear it. Then I heard keys jingling, and the doorknob to my room started to turn. Thank God I'd used the chain because the door opened about 2 inches before catching. I heard Frank's voice whisper, "Just checking you're okay, miss." Sometimes the heating acts up. I yelled back that I was fine, and after what felt like hours but was probably only seconds, he closed the door and the footsteps moved away. But here's the thing. It was April in Arizona, and I hadn't even turned the heat on. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat in the chair facing the door with my car keys in one hand and my phone in the other, ready to call 911 if Frank tried to come back. As soon as the sun started coming up around 5:30, I threw everything in my bag and got the hell out of there. But when I passed the office to drop off the key, the young guy from last night was still there, and he looked exhausted. I asked him if Frank always checked on guests like that, trying to keep my voice casual. The kid's face went white, and he asked me what I meant. When I told him about Frank trying to open my door at 2 a.m., he pulled up something on the computer and turned the monitor toward me. "Ma'am, Frank left at 10 p.m., see? He clocked out right here." He showed me the timesheet, and there it was. Frank out at 10:03 p.m. and this kid, Jeremy, clocked in at 10:05 p.m. "And honestly," Jeremy added, looking nervous now, "Frank never does night checks. That's strictly against policy." Jeremy kept staring at the screen, then at me, then back at the screen. His hands were trembling as he typed something, and I saw him pull up the room assignments for the night. "You said you're in room 31, right?" I nodded, and he spun the monitor around again. There on the screen, clear as day, it showed, "Room 23, occupied, checked in at 9:17 p.m. Room 31, vacant." My name wasn't anywhere in the system. This doesn't make sense," Jeremy muttered, clicking through different screens. "Room 23 has been showing occupied every night for the past 6 months, but we never... Frank told me never to assign that room, said it was being renovated." He looked up at me with these wide, scared eyes. "Miss, according to our system, you checked into room 23 last night. But that's impossible because..." He trailed off, and I could see him struggling with whether to tell me something. "Because what?" I practically shouted, and Jeremy flinched. He looked around the empty office like someone might be listening, then leaned forward and whispered, "Because a woman died in that room 6 months ago. The police, they never figured out what happened. She was just found there, and the room was..." He swallowed hard. "It was bad, really bad. They sealed it up after the investigation, but Frank never took it out of the system. Said corporate would handle it, but they never did." My whole body went cold as he continued. "The woman who died, her name was Claire Phillips. She was traveling alone, heading to Florida to stay with her sister after a divorce." He turned his monitor back around and pulled up an old news article from his phone. The headline read, "Woman found dead in motel room, circumstances unclear." But what made me nearly pass out was the photo. Claire Phillips looked almost exactly like me. Same dark hair, same build, even the same kind of round face and green eyes. We could have been sisters. Jeremy was typing frantically now, pulling up reservation records from 6 months ago. Claire checked in on a Wednesday night in September. Frank was working that shift. His voice dropped even lower. She was supposed to be in room 31, but Frank moved her to room 23 at the last minute. Just like... He stared at me, and we both understood what he wasn't saying, just like Frank had tried to do with me. There were 3 other women before Claire, Jeremy continued, his fingers flying across the keyboard. All traveling alone, all similar looking. All mysteriously moved to room 23 by Frank. 2 of them left in the middle of the night and never filed complaints. 1 went missing completely. Her car was found abandoned 2 states over. He grabbed a piece of paper and started writing something down. "You need to go to the police now. Take this, it's everything I can print from our records. I'll say the printer was broken if anyone asks." I grabbed the papers and ran to my car, but as I was pulling out, I saw Frank's beat-up Toyota Corolla pulling into the parking lot. He wasn't supposed to be there for hours, but there he was, and when he saw me, his face changed into something I'll never forget. Pure rage mixed with something else. Maybe disappointment. Like I was a fish that had gotten off the hook. I floored it out of there and drove straight to the police station in the next town over. The detective I spoke to, a woman named Hawkins, went pale when I showed her the papers and told her everything. Turns out they'd been investigating Frank for months but could never get enough evidence. The Room 23 system glitch was the key they needed. It proved he'd been manipulating records to cover his tracks. They arrested him that afternoon, and when they searched his house, they found journals. Detailed journals about each woman who'd stayed in room 23, including plans for what he intended to do. He'd been using his key to enter the rooms at night, and Claire Phillips had fought back. That's how she died, fighting him off. The police unsealed room 23 as part of the investigation, and what they found confirmed everything. Hidden cameras in the vents, holes drilled in the walls, and DNA evidence from multiple women. Frank had turned that room into his own sick hunting ground, specifically targeting women who looked like his ex-wife who'd left him years ago. The district attorney told me I was lucky. Frank had marked me as perfect in his journal entry from that night, and if he'd succeeded in moving me to room 23, I would have become another statistic. The motel was shut down permanently, and Frank got life without parole after they connected him to 2 other missing women from different states. Jeremy testified against him and told the court how Frank had threatened him to keep quiet about the room. I still drive cross-country sometimes for my job now, but I never stay in motels anymore. I'll drive through the night or sleep in my car before I ever take that risk again. And sometimes, when I'm on those long, empty highways, I think about Claire Phillips and how she saved my life by fighting back, by making Frank nervous enough to make mistakes, by ensuring he'd never have another perfect victim in room 23. I was heading east through Montana last August, driving my old Nissan Pathfinder on a work assignment that had me inspecting cell towers across 3 states. The company I worked for back then specialized in infrastructure maintenance, and they'd send me out on these long solo trips every few months to check equipment and file reports. I'd been on the road for about 4 days already, sleeping in different motels each night, eating at truck stops and diners, basically living out of my duffel bag and the cooler I kept in the back seat. That particular Thursday, I'd driven almost 11 hours straight, only stopping for gas and a quick sandwich at some forgettable rest area. By the time I pulled into the parking lot of the Pine Ridge Motel around 9:30 at night, my eyes were burning and my shoulders ached from gripping the steering wheel. The place sat right off Highway 91, one of those single-story motor lodges with doors that opened directly to the parking lot, painted this faded yellow color that probably looked cheerful 20 years ago. The woman at the front desk had these thick glasses that magnified her eyes to an almost comical size, and she kept sniffling while she processed my credit card, mentioning something about allergies and how the wildfire smoke made everything worse this time of year. She handed me the key to room 14, told me the ice machine was broken but there was a gas station across the street if I needed anything, and then went back to watching some game show on a tiny television behind the counter. My room was exactly what you'd expect for $65 a night. Brown carpet that felt slightly damp even though it hadn't rained, a bed with a floral comforter that smelled like industrial detergent, and a bathroom where the faucet dripped no matter how hard you turned the handle. But honestly, after that many hours on the road, I didn't care. I took a lukewarm shower, called my girlfriend Megan to let her know where I'd stopped for the night, and crashed hard, not even bothering to turn off the lamp beside the bed. The knocking woke me at exactly 3:07 a.m. I remember because the red numbers on the clock radio were the first thing I saw when my eyes snapped open. It wasn't loud or aggressive, just this steady, deliberate rhythm. 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks, pause. The kind of sound that makes you question if you're actually hearing it, or if it's just pipes in the walls, or maybe the air conditioner kicking on. I lay there for probably 30 seconds, completely still, waiting to see if it would happen again. Then it did. 3 more knocks, soft but insistent, like someone trying to be polite while also making sure they were heard. I sat up slowly, my mouth dry from the recycled motel air, and noticed that the lamp I'd left on had been turned off at some point, leaving only a thin strip of parking lot light coming through the gap in the curtains. The knocking came again, and this time I was sure it was at my door. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand and turned on the flashlight, then crept toward the door in my boxers and the t-shirt I'd worn to bed. The carpet felt grittier under my bare feet than it had earlier in my socks, and I could hear my own breathing seeming unnaturally loud in the quiet room. Through the peephole, I saw absolutely nothing, just the dimly lit walkway and the door to room 15 across from mine, maybe 8 feet away. The motion sensor light that should have been triggered by anyone standing at my door wasn't on. I waited, holding my breath, my eye pressed against that tiny lens until it started to hurt. Another set of knocks came, and I swear I could feel them vibrating through the door against my forehead, but there was nobody there. I even tried angling my view as far left and right as the peephole would allow, thinking maybe someone was standing flat against the wall beside my door, but I couldn't see anyone. My first instinct was to call out, ask who was there, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the weird timing. Maybe it was being alone in a sketchy motel in the middle of nowhere. But announcing that I was awake and aware suddenly seemed like the worst possible move. Instead, I backed away from the door and grabbed my car keys from the dresser, holding them between my fingers like I'd seen in some self-defense video years ago. The knocking stopped for maybe 2 minutes, long enough that I started to wonder if I'd imagined the whole thing, or if it was just someone at the wrong room who'd finally realized their mistake. Then it started again, but different this time. Instead of the polite triple knock pattern, it was just 1 knock, then nothing for about 10 seconds, then another single knock. Like whoever was doing it was testing something, seeing if I'd respond. I picked up my phone and almost called 911, but what would I say? Someone's knocking on my door and I can't see them. They'd probably think I was drunk or high. I must have stood there in the middle of that musty room for at least 20 minutes, every muscle tense, listening to these sporadic knocks that came without any predictable rhythm. Sometimes it would be silent for a full minute, then I'd hear a soft tap, tap, tap that was barely louder than my own heartbeat. Other times it was a single firm knock that made me jump even though I was expecting it. At some point, I noticed something that made my whole body go rigid. The doorknob was turning, not like someone trying to force it open, but slowly, carefully, just testing to see if it was locked. I'd engaged both the regular lock and the deadbolt when I came in, habit from years of traveling alone, but seeing that knob rotate maybe a quarter turn before stopping and returning to its original position made me realize whoever was out there wasn't just knocking randomly. They were checking every room, looking for one that someone forgot to secure. I decided to do something that, looking back, was probably stupid, but felt necessary at the time. I crept over to the window beside the door and carefully pulled the curtain back just an inch, trying to get a different angle on whoever was out there. The parking lot was mostly dark, except for one flickering streetlight near the motel's sign, and the glow from a Pepsi vending machine 3 doors down. My Pathfinder was right where I'd left it, along with maybe 6 other vehicles scattered across the lot. A couple of semis at the far end, a minivan with Oklahoma plates, and a few pickups. Nothing looked out of place, no one walking around, no suspicious cars idling with their lights off. But then I saw it, a shadow moving along the walkway, staying close to the wall where the overhead lights didn't quite reach. It wasn't walking normally. It was more like sliding along, stopping at each door for maybe 30 seconds before moving to the next one. From my angle, I could only make out that it was definitely a person, average height, wearing something dark, but the way they moved was deliberate and practiced, like they'd done this exact thing many times before. The shadow reached room 16, 2 doors down from mine, and I watched it stop and lean close to the door. Even from inside my room, I could hear the faint sound of knocking, that same triple knock pattern that had woken me up. This went on for maybe a minute before the figure tried the doorknob, jiggling it more aggressively than they had with mine. Then they moved to room 17, and I realized they were working their way down the entire row of rooms. At that point, my phone showed 3:41 a.m., and I made the decision to call the front desk. It rang probably 15 times before that same woman with the thick glasses answered, sounding groggy and annoyed. I told her someone was going door to door, trying doorknobs, and she needed to call the police. She mumbled something about checking it out and hung up. I watched through the gap in my curtain for another 10 minutes, but the shadow had disappeared somewhere past room 18, and I couldn't see that far without opening my door, which was absolutely not happening. I spent the rest of the night sitting on the floor between the bed and the wall, my back against the nightstand, holding a pocket knife I'd dug out of my travel bag. Every little sound made me tense up. The ice machine suddenly dropping cubes somewhere down the walkway, a door slamming shut at the far end of the motel, even just the normal settling noises that old buildings make. Around 4:30, I heard what sounded like rapid footsteps passing my room, almost running, followed by a car door slamming and an engine starting up. I wanted to look out the window again but couldn't bring myself to move from my spot on the floor. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving me exhausted but still too wired to even think about sleeping. I kept checking my phone, watching the minutes crawl by, waiting for sunrise like it was some kind of magical protection. The woman from the front desk never came by to check anything, never called back, and I didn't see any police cars pull up. By 5:45, when the sky started getting that grayish pre-dawn color, I finally felt safe enough to stand up and stretch my cramped legs. At exactly 6 a.m., I was packed and ready to leave. I'd thrown everything into my bag without folding anything, just wanting to get out of that room as fast as possible. When I opened the door, the morning felt surreal. Birds chirping, a maintenance guy pushing a cart full of cleaning supplies down the walkway, everything normal and peaceful. I loaded my stuff into the Pathfinder and was about to drive off when I decided to stop by the office to check out properly and maybe say something about the night before. There was a different person at the desk now, a younger guy with a neck tattoo who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. While he was processing my receipt, I mentioned the knocking and the person trying doorknobs, and his expression changed immediately. He asked what time it happened, which room I was in, and then told me I was lucky I had both locks engaged. Apparently, around 4:15 that morning, the guest in room 22 had called the police because their door had been forced open while they were sleeping. Nothing was stolen, but the guest, an older man traveling to visit his daughter, woke up to find someone standing at the foot of his bed, just watching him. The guy at the desk pulled out an incident report form and started filling it out while telling me more details. The old man in room 22 had apparently screamed, which scared off the intruder, who ran out through the still open door and disappeared into the darkness. The police found marks on the door frame where it looked like someone had used a crowbar or something similar to pop the lock. The deadbolt hadn't been engaged, just the standard lock that comes with the doorknob. They also found similar marks on 3 other doors, rooms 19, 20, and 21, but those had deadbolts locked so the person couldn't get in. The desk clerk said the police were reviewing security footage, but the cameras only covered the parking lot and the office area, not the walkways in front of the rooms. He mentioned that this was the third incident like this in the past 2 months, always happening between 3 and 4 a.m., always targeting solo travelers in the rooms furthest from the office. The way he said it so matter-of-factly, like it was just another minor inconvenience, made me realize they knew this was a problem and hadn't done anything to warn guests or improve security. I left that motel feeling a mix of relief and anger that's hard to describe. Relief that I'd trusted my instincts to lock both locks and stay alert instead of opening the door or going back to sleep. Anger that the motel staff knew someone was targeting their guests and didn't even have the decency to put up a sign reminding people to use their deadbolts or report suspicious activity. I ended up filing my own police report at a station about 20 miles down the highway, and the officer there told me they suspected it was someone who used to work at various motels along that stretch of road. Someone who knew exactly which rooms were occupied by checking the parking lot and the registration system. They never caught anyone as far as I know. I checked online a few times over the following months, but there were no arrests mentioned. I still travel for work sometimes, though I changed companies last year, and I never stay in ground floor motel rooms anymore. If that's the only option, I keep driving until I find somewhere else. And I always use every lock available. Plus, I bring my own door wedge alarm that I bought online for $12. Some people think I'm paranoid, but they didn't spend a night listening to someone methodically testing doors, looking for that one person who forgot to turn that second lock. I was on a short work trip, staying overnight at a small roadside motel. At that point in my life, I was constantly driving from one town to another, meeting clients during the day and crashing wherever I could find a vacancy. That night, I had checked in late, grabbed a quick shower, and went down the hall to find something from the vending machine. It was quiet in that place, the kind of silence where you can hear the hum of the old fluorescent light above the ice machine. That's where I met him. He was standing there feeding coins into the soda machine, tall with dark hair that was slightly messy like he had been driving all day. He introduced himself as Mark. His voice was steady but had a scratch to it, like someone who had smoked for years. We made small talk, mostly about long drives and bad motel coffee, the usual things strangers mention when crossing paths. He told me he was staying in room 23, just down the hall from mine, and that he was heading further east in the morning. I remember thinking it was nice to actually talk to someone after a day alone on the road. The conversation lasted maybe 15 minutes, just two tired travelers talking beside humming machines in a dim hallway. What struck me was how specific he was, mentioning his drive through small back roads, complaining about a diner where the pancakes tasted like cardboard. He laughed about it, and for some reason it felt genuine enough that I went back to my room thinking maybe I'd bump into him again in the morning before checkout. I remember lying in bed afterward, feeling strangely less alone, knowing another guest was just a few doors away. The next morning, after packing up, I went to the front desk to drop off my key. On a whim, I asked the clerk if Mark had already checked out. She gave me a confused look and asked for his last name. When I told her, she frowned and flipped through the guest list behind the counter. After a minute, she said there was no record of anyone by that name ever checking in. I thought maybe he'd used a different name, but then she told me something that still unsettles me. There was no room 23 in that building. I laughed at first, thinking maybe she misunderstood me. I even described him. The messy dark hair, the raspy voice, his story about the cardboard pancakes. The clerk just shook her head and said she'd worked the front desk all evening and hadn't seen anyone like that walk in. I pressed a little harder, mentioning the soda machine conversation, the fact that he'd told me he was in room 23. That's when she pulled out a laminated map of the property and laid it on the counter. She pointed at the layout. The room numbers stopped at 21 on that side of the building, and the next wing began with 30. There had never been a room 23. I left the office unsettled but still trying to rationalize it. Maybe he'd lied about the number for privacy. Maybe he was staying off the books for some reason. It wasn't until I walked back down the hall to grab a bottle of water from the vending machine that the strangeness hit me full force. The machine where we'd stood talking was half empty, the hum softer that morning, and there were no traces that anyone else had been there. Usually people leave small signs, an empty cup, a wrapper, even just scuff marks on the floor, but it looked untouched, like I'd imagined the whole encounter. What kept gnawing at me was how vivid the conversation had been. He had laughed at my joke about motel mattresses being basically cardboard springs. He had leaned against the wall, tapping the soda can in his hand as he talked. I could still picture the way he gestured, holding the can like it was an extension of his story. These weren't dreamlike fragments, they were solid, grounded details. Yet somehow, according to the motel, Mark never existed in that building. I checked out anyway and drove off, but the entire day on the road, I kept replaying the exchange in my head. The sound of the coins clinking into the slot, the hiss of the soda can dropping, even the way his voice echoed slightly in the tiled hallway. It all felt too real to dismiss. But then I'd remember the clerk's expression, the certainty in her voice, and the map with its neatly numbered rooms. No room 23, no Mark, just me, standing there with a stranger who apparently left no trace at all. That night, after hours on the highway, I stopped at another motel just to get some rest. I sat on the bed with the TV on low, but my attention kept drifting back to Mark. I even considered calling the first motel again to double-check, but I already knew what they'd say. There was no record of him, no room with that number. I couldn't shake the sense that I'd spoken with someone who had simply vanished from the paper trail, like he'd never been entered into the system of reality at all. A week later, curiosity finally got the best of me. I phoned the motel and asked, this time pretending I'd lost touch with a friend who had stayed there around the same time I did. The woman at the desk paused, then told me the only guests checked in that night were myself and an older couple traveling from out of state. She was firm about it. Nobody else was here, she said. Her tone wasn't rude. It was almost pitying, like she thought I was confused. That was the moment I realized there would be no neat explanation. I hadn't misheard him. He gave me a name, a room number, details about his travels. I hadn't dreamed him. The condensation on his soda can had dripped onto the floor, and I remembered stepping around the little puddle. And yet, according to every record and every staff member at that motel, Mark never existed. It left me with a strange contradiction, the most vivid memory of a stranger I've ever met, paired with the certainty that no one else could confirm he was real. Even now, whenever I pass through small towns and see glowing motel signs at the edge of the road, I think back to that night. I still hear the clink of coins in the vending machine and his raspy laugh echoing in the hallway. I never saw him again, and maybe that's for the best. But I know, with every fiber of memory, that I shared a conversation with someone who left no trace behind. And that knowledge follows me every time I check into a motel alone.